Wake Up to Money.
Welcome to the Wake Up to Money podcast. You're listening to Sean Farrington and Louise Cooper on BBC 5 Live. Coming up on the programme, the UK is on a completely different wavelength to those in Brussels, according to sources at the European Union. And here's what Theresa May made of reports of a row in negotiations.
I have to say that from what I've seen of this account, I think it's Brussels gossip.
Is the upcoming election all about Brexit for British business, though? We'll hear what the Chambers of Commerce want to see in party manifestos. We're voting mad in the UK at the moment. This week sees the Metro Mayor elections as well. Lots more power for those elected in certain regions. And salad lovers can breathe a sigh of relief. UK crops have sprouted early, meaning more stock and lower prices in store.
Many markets were closed yesterday for May Day or Labour Day. That included London. So a reminder, the FTSE closed at 7203 on Friday. The FT leads with Brussels poised for power grab on London's Euro clearing market.
This is BBC 5 Live.
So over the programme today, we're going to be looking at what British business wants from parties' manifestos ahead of the election, and particularly from the British Chambers of Commerce. But it's difficult, as you can see from the headlines again today, to get away from Brexit issues. That's what's grabbing a lot of them in the papers, Louise. We've had there have been reports over the weekend, haven't there, in a German newspaper about a row between the Prime Minister and the President of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker. Theresa May, as we heard just then, called it gossip, but still the papers are going with some carry-on lines from there, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, it's front page Telegraph, front page The Guardian. Let me read. I mean, of course, The Guardian is pro the EU, but let me just read the opening paragraph on The Guardian. Theresa May was fighting accusations of a botched and humiliating start to the Brexit negotiations last night as claims emerged that she was told by European leaders that the two sides were so opposed there was no point in even starting talks about Britain's departure. If I was being really cynical about all this, I would say this is great negotiating from the EU, because what do you want to do when you're negotiating a deal? You want to put pressure on the other side. And I imagine Theresa May's PR advisors are feeling pretty pressured with that kind of opening paragraph in The Guardian.
Yeah, and what's the Telegraph's EU plots to block May's deal on expats, as you say. So there's a few things in there, but how crucial are each of our political parties' negotiation tactics to the upcoming election? The British Chambers of Commerce sets out its stall today in its own manifesto. A little later in the programme, we'll be hearing from its Director General. But while the main parties may not have their own manifestos in print yet, there are a fair few financial and economic pledges. We heard a few over the weekend, didn't we, Louise, from various parties?
Yeah, I mean, first out the gates, Theresa May vowing not to raise VAT if the Tories won the election. Although if you look at the tax take from VAT over the last 10, 20 years, it has increased substantially. Also, given the country's debt now stands at £1.7 trillion, she didn't rule out future rises to national insurance and income tax.
In relation to specific taxes, we won't be increasing VAT, but what I do want to ensure is that when we do look more widely at the tax system, that what we say on the tax system, we're absolutely clear we can deliver on it for people. And also, as I say, I want to see us able to reduce taxes on working families.
She was also fairly outspoken on pensions, vowing to ensure company pensions are protected from unscrupulous bosses if she wins the election.
So that if, in certain circumstances where companies were being taken over, there will be new powers for the regulator to make sure that the issue around people's future pensions was being addressed. We will also be introducing greater powers to take action against individuals if what they were doing was about effectively trying to destroy people's pensions for the future.
That comes, of course, after scandals such as BHS and the amount that Sir Philip Green put into the BHS pension system. In terms of the triple lock, this is the guarantee that every year the state pension will rise either by inflation, average wages, or 2.5%, whichever is the highest. She refused to say whether the Tories would protect that.
And we've heard from other parties on that one as well. Back at Labour HQ, that party has been targeting a lot of education, housing, policies for workers. And while we heard there of Mrs May vowing not to hike VAT, Jeremy Corbyn from Labour had promised low taxes for low and medium earners.
We're the party that wants low taxes for low and medium earners. The Conservative Party are the party that wants low taxes for the high earners. We look at things the other way around. And so, yes, there will be changes, but there will be very, very much at the top end.
So the party's also said it's going to be unveiling a 20-point plan to tackle what it's been calling the rigged economy, including increasing the minimum wage, banning zero-hours contracts, ending the public sector pay freeze. Lots to talk about there with Adam Marshall, from who's Director General of the Chambers of Commerce, a little later in the programme. On Monday, yesterday, the party set out plans to introduce designed to improve conditions for people renting their homes. Proposals the Conservatives said would simply increase rents.
Also on education, Labour went to the head teachers conference and said education would be a priority for a Labour government and promised an extra £3 billion for school finances in England.
If it's a choice between a tax giveaway to the largest corporations paying the lowest rates of tax in the developed world and pledged to go even lower, or funding of our schools, our choice will be very, very different from the choice that's been made up to now.
So far, the other main parties haven't given too much detail of their financial and economic pledges ahead of the election. But if you've got any yourself, of course, over the next few weeks, do let us know what you would like to see. Are there some things we've mentioned there that you would be happy to see in a manifesto? Increasing the minimum wage, banning zero-hours contracts, putting the stall out, and saying they're not going to raise a certain tax. Is that what you want to hear from parties? You can let us know, 85058, or on social media at BBC 5 Live. We'll be talking about that more later in the programme. Also, Louise, crucially, it's an update on Lettucegate.
Or the courgette crisis.
Well, yes, I mean, we've got somebody who runs a company called Side Salad later, so he should know a lot about all of this.
And the rising cost of avocado, which as a hipster is, I imagine, Sean, hitting you hard?
Myself, I thought you...
I was joking that you were a hipster, Sean.
No, I was in charge of cheese at the weekend on our camping trip. That's the limit to mine.
Not avocado. Good.
No, but everybody must have been in the shops at the weekend doing a bit more cooking than they might have done. So we need to do a bit of a wake up to money price check. So reports that lettuce prices are going to be pushed lower because of an increase in stock and earlier than expected glut. As Louise mentions, avocados have been hitting the headlines. Prices up now to over £1 for the fruit. There's been a bit of hummus shortage apparently at some point as well. I missed that one. What have you seen in the shops over the weekend? That's what we want to know. The big moves, because there's clearly a lot going on at supermarkets in the minute. We've got big results out later this week, but this is the Wake Up to Money price check. Get in touch with us, 85058 if you want to send us a text, or on social media at BBC 5 Live.
Wake Up to Money around the world
On 5 Live. 5 Live.
Now, markets here weren't open yesterday, Louise, but they were doing some graft in the United States.
Yeah, first day of May saw the tech-heavy Nasdaq hit another record high, up 44 points to 6,091. Results from Apple are due today, Facebook due tomorrow, both after the market close. Expected to be pretty strong after great figures from Amazon and Alphabet, owner of Google, last week. The month of April, clearly yesterday was the first day of May, the month of April did actually see US stocks climb higher again. In terms of the wider market, the S&P 500 rose just 4 points to 2388 and the Dow Jones slightly lower.
We're joined over the programme this morning by Laura Lambie from Investec Wealth and Investment. Laura, morning.
Good morning.
Just on the latest thing from Donald Trump, wake up this morning, the headline this morning is he's considering breaking up the banks. Now, we haven't seen too much of a focus from him on banks just yet, have we? I mean, what could happen here?
Well, this is his thoughts that he's going to bring back the Glass-Steagall Act, which was repealed in 1999, which split basically consumer lending from investment banking. And some critics have said that it was the repealing of that act that brought along the financial crisis of 2007-8. So bearing in mind what Trump says is not always what he does, I suspect the markets have taken this with just a pinch of salt.
And to round up our look at the world, let's cross to Singapore. Rico Heason's with us. Rico,
hey,
morning.
Sean,
Morning,
Louise, happy
Rico.
May to both of you.
May.
Happy May. Is that that's what we're saying these days? Any month that comes along. Rico, what are we talking about today? Cinemas in China.
Chinese cinema, that's right. So, Sean, Louise, what? Do you like watching action or fantasy films?
Probably a bit of both.
No, I'd be
bit of
only
both.
action.
Right,
yeah, I
yeah.
can't really do with fantasy myself.
Bit of both. No, I like a bit of both.
Oh my goodness! So of course you have the action movie, The Fate of the Furious, and the fantasy film Beauty and the Beast, basically helping China's box office receipts in the month of April. And these two movies, Sean and Luis, basically showing that China's appeal for Hollywood films is continuing to rise. Monthly ticket sales jumping nearly 57% from the same period a year ago. You know, China's box office, which is a magnet for Hollywood producers, saw growth stall last year due to several factors. One, you have a crackdown on subsidies, a weak slate of movies, and a local quota system for imported films to questions over censorship. So these are some of the issues that the Hollywood producers have to face in China. But if they hurdle most of these issues, then we're likely to see Hollywood films making a lot of money in the mainland.
And quick look at markets, Rico.
Well, if you take a look at the markets today, shares rising to near two-year highs due to growing optimism over technology industry earnings. And you also have these easing concerns, Luis, over North Korea, offsetting softer than expected factory readings in China and the United States. Tokyo is in positive territory due to the weaker yen against the U.S. dollar, now at about 112 yen. You also have South Korea, Singapore, Malaysia, the Philippines, all in the plus column.
Rico, thank you very much. Catch
Thanks,
you again.
Sean. Thanks, Louise.
Over the week.
Bye,
Rico. He's
Rico.
on there from Singapore. Louise, Greg in Plymouth's already got in touch. He says, on a serious note, first he makes the point, the severe shortage of Easter eggs. Very good, Greg. But he says, on a serious note, it seems the price of a loaf has risen by at least 5p in the last week. He's kept an eye on. So do let us know if you've spotted any big price movements in the last couple of weeks. It seems that, well, the inflation story is bubbling along, isn't it, Louise? Prices on the up. But
Yeah, we get results from Sainsbury's and Morrison's this week. It'll be interesting to see what they say about pricing.
And in the papers today, lots,
Yeah,
isn't there?
lots on the tech. We heard there from Rico about tech companies booming, and I found 3 tech stories. So, front page of the business section, Daily Telegraph. Apple's cash pile overtakes UK government's foreign reserves. Apple has a cash pile of over $250 billion, a sum greater than the combined foreign reserves of the British government and the Bank of England, which says an awful lot. On the inside, a whole article about Jeff Bezos, the man who founded Amazon. He is now almost the richest man in the world. He's only $5 billion worth less than Bill Gates. Apparently, over the last 5 years, the value of his shares that he owns has risen $65 billion in 5 years. That's what Jeff Bezos is worth more now than he was 5 years ago. And then also, in The Guardian, Google and Facebook now take a fifth, just 2 companies, of global ad spending. If you want to know the dominance of tech companies and the reason why the NASDAQ is hitting all-time highs, those 3 stories just give you a sense.
Talking about net worth, in a few of the papers today have continued to pick up on the Green family. So Philip Green and his Monaco-based wife Tina, as the Times puts it, have seen their joint fortune fall by £433 million. And as the headline goes in a few of the papers, they're down to their last £2.787 billion.
Not much
Sunday
compared.
Times rich list.
Not much compared to Jeff Bezos, though. There you go.
No.
Front page of the Financial Times. This is in a lot of the papers. Bank of Mum and Dad rises to 9th in lender league with £6.5 billion of annual loans. The Bank of Mum and Dad has unofficially become Britain's 9th biggest mortgage lender, with loans and gifts from family or friends increasing 30% this year to £6.5 billion as house prices keep rising.
Front of the Times, fears for car market amid loan mis-selling.
Yes.
So this is a story that it talks about the car finance market, £40 billion, it says. Nearly 90% of new cars are sold through finance deals, and there's some question marks about some companies that the Times lists that may be having a little bit of difficulty after director resignations, and possibly one expert in that article saying that there may be issues around how much people know when they are signing up to these deals. Do they know who is actually lending them the cash? Because these contracts are getting moved around between different companies.
Staycation Do you like a bit of staycation, Sean? You've
That-
been
that
away
has
for a couple
been-
of
Yeah,
weeks.
that has been. I've really.
You
really
like a
gone
bit
into
of
it
a
the last-
staycation, don't you?
Well, the last week or so, yeah, it's not been a big thing for me previously, but Northern Ireland, Wales, Norfolk.
There you see, you were staycation. You were fueling
me.
the staycation trend.
I wasn't in a caravan though.
No, okay, so holiday parks in the UK saw turnover up 9% to £2.67 billion last year. And that's up significantly from 5 years ago. And they've taken a broader appeal since the recession as a cheap alternative to overseas holiday. I don't think it's all about money. There are some beautiful places in our country to visit. Go out and discover them.
Thank you for all your texts as well on whether it's what you want to see in the manifesto. A couple of texts, one saying, reduce the bloated, obscene foreign aid budget. Somebody else saying, this is all smoke and mirrors for the masses. We will have a second referendum and no Brexit. None of the elite in Europe and Westminster want it, says Paul. And Brian makes the key point so far in the morning. What's the point in buying an avocado that is as hard as a bullet, irrespective of price?
Put it next to a banana and it will get lovely and ripe.
There you go. Our top story today, the British Chambers of Commerce has warned in its election manifesto that the best Brexit deal won't be worth the paper it's written on, it says, if companies cannot recruit staff. US President Donald Trump has promised to roll back legislation covering the banking sector, as well as saying he's considering breaking up big Wall Street banks by splitting their consumer business from their investment operations. And a row between Hollywood studios and screenwriters could lead to the first writers' strike in a decade. The current deal expires at 8 a.m. UK time this morning. If the dispute's a lengthy one, it could see film and TV production shut down. If you've got any thoughts, of course, you can text us 85058 on social media at BBC5 Live. If you want to catch the podcast, go to bbc.co.uk/5 Live. You can subscribe to it there through any of the podcast applications you have on your smartphone. Now, on Thursday, some of England's major cities and counties will vote for their first directly elected Metro Mayor. These areas may already have a local or ceremonial mayor, but these new posts create the top decision makers in local government, each in charge of a multi-million-pound budget. To explain more, here's 5 Live's Liz Mahy.
Unlike a ceremonial mayor, with very few duties to carry out, these mayors will have considerable decision-making powers in 6 major areas of England: Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, Greater Manchester, Liverpool City Region, Tees Valley, West Midlands and West of England. So what will each one be able to do? West Midlands gets £1.1 billion and more powers over adult skills and education, compulsory purchase powers to obtain land or property, and more control over transport links and services. Greater Manchester gets £900 million and gets the most powers, including adult skills, post-16 education and apprenticeship grants for employers, more housing and planning powers, including mayoral development corporations, control over a range of transport areas, and the purse strings of a £6 billion health and social care budget. Neighbouring Liverpool also gets £900 million and powers over adult and post-16 education and apprenticeships, more control over urban development, power over transport and local roads, and greater health and social care powers. £900 million also goes to West of England, made up of Bath and North East Somerset, Bristol and South Gloucestershire. It gets adult and post-16 education and apprenticeships powers, more control over development and planning, a transport budget, but no extra say in terms of health and social care. And £450 million goes to Tees Valley. Its powers are more limited, an adult skills budget, more urban development control, and a transport budget.
So there's a rundown from Liz Mahy for us there. Joining us now is Mike Emmerich, founding director at Metro Dynamics, which is a consultancy that advises people leading or investing in cities, and is a former UK government policy advisor as well. Morning, Mike.
Good morning.
So lots of different regions here voting for a mayor later this week. Is there one key thing that links them all? Because as we heard from Liz there, there are differing powers, but what's the overriding power that's being transferred?
I think before you look at specific policy powers, I think the thing that they've all got in common is it's taking power out of Whitehall and Westminster and putting it back in, the great cities of Birmingham, Liverpool, Manchester, and Bristol and the others. And that's going to give local people, local leaders, a chance to deal better with what are essentially local problems. So I think that's the overall thrust of it. In terms of which power, I think if there's one really symbolic one, I'd say it's transport, and in particular it's bus re-regulation. And I say that because there are only two models in the country of how we run buses. There's the London model, whereby City Hall, under Ken Livingstone, Boris Johnson, now Sadiq Khan, franchises the buses, which means that you can cross-subsidise within the franchises so that you get buses running down profitable and unprofitable routes. Or there's the way everywhere else has done it traditionally, where you get the competition on the street. And here in Manchester, what that results in is huge queues of buses on the profitable routes and no buses on the non-profitable ones. And that's going to change in these city regions with their elected mayors who will have responsibility for franchising buses so that we move everywhere in these mayoral areas towards a London system. And what we've seen in London is the one area where bus patronage has risen, unsurprisingly, because it's well regulated.
How will the newly elected mayors work with local authorities? I think of, like, so Obama with the Houses of Congress in the States, a lot of things he couldn't do because he didn't control both houses. So I'm trying to work out, how much power the mayor will have to impose his will, even if local authorities don't necessarily agree with him.
On some issues, the mayor will have complete power, but I think you're absolutely right. On most areas, these mayors will have to work with the local authorities. So again, people familiar with London see an executive mayor in Sadiq Khan who has power. The Assembly is there to scrutinise him. These mayoral combined authorities are very different, and quite deliberately so. What the mayor will be is the chair of the combined authority, and on most issues will have to get a majority of the local council. So here in Greater Manchester, there are 10 councils. On most issues, the mayor's going to have a majority of those councils voting with him or her to get business through. So yes, I think there is a parallel with the example you describe, and that's deliberate in the way it was set up to make sure not that the mayor can impose anything on the councils, but that they have to work together using the mayor's strategic powers and the council's other important powers together for the good of the whole place.
Would there be a better time to do this and have these elections this week than right in the middle of Brexit negotiations, where a lot of these cities, maybe when they signed up for having a mayor, didn't really know what the future of the UK economy was going to look like when they did it?
I'm not convinced that there's ever a good time to do any sort of governance change, and this seems to me like as good a time as any. In fact, I'd argue it's actually probably not a bad time, in that what you're going to see is, obviously Brexit's a very uncertain time. The negotiations are only just really starting. We don't know what the outcome's going to be, and what these 6 places are going to have is a new powerful local figurehead who's going to stand up for that place. That strikes me as probably a good thing.
And just to have lots of candidates in lots of different areas. Are you impressed with the quality of candidate in all areas to be able to take on these big powers that they're going to get?
Well, there are 2 candidates that is worth drawing out in that respect. John Lewis is arguably Britain's last untarnished business treasure, and its former chief executive standing in the West Midlands. And here in Greater Manchester, we've got a man who would have been the leader of the Labour Party and a future Prime Minister. That suggests to me that people are standing, and they're by no means the only ones. There's plenty of others
too. And you would say there are more as well.
Yeah, absolutely. There's lots of good candidates, but I mean, people of that stature deciding that they want to run their own, their own cities. That strikes me that this is an experiment that's got some impetus behind it.
Mike, thank you very much. We'll follow it through with you as the results come in. Founding director at Metro Dynamics, Mike Emmerich there.
News has broken in the last few hours that Greece has come to a deal with its creditors over reforms required to release the next round of bailout cash. The reforms include cuts to pensions, yet more, and more tax rises. Well, with us to look at the markets is Laura Lambie, Senior Investment Director at Investec Wealth and Investment. Is this significant? Is Greece finally turning a corner?
I don't know about that.
I love your scepticism.
Yes, we've been here many times before. Certainly, they have to get this through legislation before they get their £7.5 billion pound of bailout. And we've had May Day protests throughout Greece with citizens angry at Greece capitulating to the IMF and to the Eurozone. So more of the same, I think. It's not over yet, but the crisis has been stalled for the time being.
US President Donald Trump looking at reimposing the separation of retail investment banking in the US, the Glass-Steagall Act. We talked about it earlier. This is similar to what we're doing in the UK, isn't it?
There have been lots of thoughts of separating investment banking from consumer banking, and there's been a lot of resistance, not surprisingly, from the banks themselves. Certainly in the US, banks have soared on the back of very pro-business talk by the Republicans. And I don't think Donald Trump saying that he wants to get the Glass-Steagall Act back in again, it necessarily reflects the views of his party.
Because what was interesting is the bank share prices wobbled a bit yesterday and then just rose again. Clearly, the stock market doesn't think he's going to do this.
Exactly, and he is surrounded by an administration that have very strong links to Wall Street and the banks. So that, again, is probably unlikely to be bad news for the banks.
Apple and Facebook results. Apple tonight after the close, Facebook tomorrow after the close.
Yep, that's what's really been spurring the market, Wall Street on over the past few days. We've had the big tech giants of Amazon and Alphabet last week. We've got Facebook and Apple. The shares are reaching their all-time high. We are expecting good results. Facebook, between Facebook and Google, they've got something like 77% of digital ad spend in the US. And so that sort of size in itself just, continues the momentum. Number. Absolutely. Apple, too, we're expecting some news about the new iPhone, the 10th anniversary iPhone that's coming into play in the autumn. So, yes, these two giants just rolling on, and share prices reflecting that.
Bloomberg reported on Monday that RBS, British Bank, Swiss Bank UBS and the French bank BNP Paribas had been subpoenaed as part of a criminal investigation into possible manipulation of the US government bond market, government debt market. This has the potential to be really quite large.
Yes, this is a little known in debt instrument called a when issued debt, and this allows banks to sell securities before they actually own them. So you can quite imagine that is certainly open to manipulation. The latest in the back of a number of scandals that have hit the banking sector, things that we'd never heard of before, such as LIBOR and the dark pool activities and all manner of things. So this is just the latest in a long list of accusations that the banks have been using their power to manipulate markets and make money from it.
A whole decade on from the start of the financial crisis, and we're still discovering, as the great, I think it was Buffett, we're still discovering when the tide goes out who's been swimming skinny dipping. Laura, I think Sean has a text for you.
So somebody's just got in touch. Dr. C. Betts have signed off as. Your report suggests high-tech shares are a stairway to financial heaven. Please tell us what threats or risks are also attached to Amazon and other booming shares. There seems no possible downside, but there must be some surely. Laura, when you look at, Louise was talking about earlier, the domination of Google and Facebook and how rich Amazon's founder is. When you look at those shares, what are the possible downsides?
I think the big threat in Facebook, which we have seen in the back of the US presidential election and on Brexit, is this fake news. Facebook distances itself from being a media company. It says it's a natural or a neutral technology platform, and it has no obligation to check that the stories that it's broadcasting are accurate, but it's coming under increasing pressure to make sure that it is not broadcasting news stories that are factually incorrect. And indeed has actually employed fact checkers to make sure that the news that it is streaming is accurate. So I think that's a big risk for Facebook, which it's reluctantly doing something about.
The other thing I would add to that is the big issue with a lot of high growth companies is valuations. You pay a very high price for high growth, and if they don't deliver on that growth, then the shares can fall. Laura Lambie from Investec Wealth, thank you very much for joining us. Today, the oil giant BP reports first quarter results. Also in the US, the Federal Open Market Committee starts its meeting ahead of a rate decision announced tomorrow. No change is expected, although a rise at the next meeting in June currently forecast. On the currency markets, a pound buys €1.18 and £1 buys $1.29.
A couple of texts in on the mayoral election, Louise, that aren't as convinced as I guess Mike Emmerich was earlier on them. Stephen Ipswich says, Mayors, this is a con. Local democracies are unaccountable bureaucracies which will look after themselves before and above all else. This suits Whitehall, which can then wash its hands of difficult problems. It's a grubby compact and the only winners will be second-rate politicians. And David in Leeds says, along similar lines, mayoral powers just mean lots of blame shifting from Westminster.
It'll be interesting to see what the turnout is.
Yes, particularly with another election coming up a few weeks later. You've got
Indeed.
to have all your voting cards in order at home on the kitchen table. Make sure you take the right ones at the right time. Now, today, a major business group says it wants the next government to commit to not introducing any new upfront taxes on businesses. The British Chamber of Commerce has published its own manifesto, Brexit and Beyond, in which it also calls for answers to questions around how businesses could be affected by the UK leaving the European Union. And we're joined by Dr. Adam Marshall, who is Director General of the Chambers of Commerce. Adam, good morning.
Good morning, Sean.
Just to start off with this negotiations row, I mean, do you think at the minute, when you look at how the UK is handling negotiations, that the UK and the EU are on a different wavelength about Brexit?
Well, I think for the business communities I see around the United Kingdom, quite frankly, it's a lot of noise, Sean. They want to see what the outcome is and they want to see what the answers to the practical questions will be. Who can I hire? Who do I pay VAT to? Will my stuff get stopped at customs if I'm shipping it overseas? That's the stuff that really matters to them. Quite frankly, most of them are ignoring a lot of this noise. This is something for the media bubble.
And when you, as you've outlined in your own manifesto, you request a few things that you'd like to see in party manifestos. And one of those is often detail. When it was before various referendums, you wanted more detail. Do you ever feel like, whichever party you look at, you ever get the detail you need?
Well, businesses are a demanding lot, and of course they want to know exactly what's going to happen and when, and most of the time they are frustrated by general election manifestos. But what we hear from them around the UK is a desire to focus on what's really practical. When you've got businesses that can't get a mobile phone signal, when you get businesses who say that young people coming out of local colleges are very hard for them to recruit and train up for the job, when they say that on the roads they're still facing incredible pinch points, all of these kinds of things are decisions that can be taken here in the UK. They're nothing to do with Brexit. They're things where a government could give businesses the platform they need to succeed. And that's where they really want to see action. And that's where they think that all this Brexit talk is distracting Westminster.
Is it the case that one of your big demands is a call for no new upfront taxes on business?
Absolutely. What firms say to us, Louise, is they don't mind paying taxes on their profits. What they mind is paying a huge number of different levies up front before they even turn over any money.
Business rates?
Well, rates is the biggest one. That's $25 billion a year. You have things like insurance premium tax rises, which hit the smallest businesses very hard. You've got the apprenticeship levy. You've got the national living wage. You've got pensions auto-enrollment. You know, if you want a great business environment in the UK, what you can't say to firms is don't take risks, don't hire anyone, don't invest, because you've got to pay all this stuff up front.
Adam, a couple of years ago, that was when the last election was, not that long ago, you had in your manifesto then a demand to maintain the lowest rate of corporation tax in the G20. You're not making that demand this time. Why is that?
Well, what our businesses have said to us over the past couple of years is they're very satisfied with the trajectory of corporation tax. They say they don't mind paying the 17% rate that we're heading towards at the moment. They say that's no problem for them at all. And actually, this question of upfront taxes has risen up the agenda because, of course, over the last 2 years, we've seen those rise even further on many businesses. So the pressure is coming on firms up front. They don't mind paying at the back end. as long as all firms do. They don't want to see biggest firms avoiding corporation tax and other firms continuing to pay.
So you wouldn't mind a little increase then, maybe?
Well, some firms wouldn't. There are differences of view across our network, but some firms wouldn't.
I mean, what you're saying is we want to pay less tax. Most people want to pay less tax. I mean, you're just talking your own book. But at the same time, you want the government to spend on education, road network. So how do those two things work? You want the government to spend on education, road network, other things, but you want low corporation tax and low other taxes. Those two things don't go together. Someone has to pay for it.
If you lower the upfront taxes on your business community, you will see more investment and more recruitment from those business communities. You will see more tax coming into the exchequer, and you will be able to spend those revenues on the things that makes the business environment work. If you tax businesses to death up front, what you won't then have is the revenues coming in thereafter. And that's one of the things that's so often not recognised. Businesses that invest pay more tax.
What do you make of the party's views on deficit reduction and what we should do with the budget in the UK? Should they still be looking to reduce it as quickly as they are?
Well, when you talk to businesses, they want to see a deficit reduction strategy that the market will bear. And I think over the past 6 or 7 years, what's been very clear is that the market will bear the deficit reduction strategies of successive chancellors because they are committed to bringing down the overall quantum of borrowing.
Which end up being not quite as aggressive as they first say. So are you sort of saying that businesses actually don't mind a slower reduction in our deficit, or even potentially an occasional increase if needed?
Well, they don't mind it as long as the markets will bear it. The UK can continue to borrow at reasonable rates. What they're saying is they do want fiscal responsibility, they do want prudence, they don't want public money and taxpayers' money wasted. But at the same time, they understand that if you bring it down a little bit more slowly, you might actually be able to do some of the things that they want to see, like fix some of the road networks and the railways.
What about interest rates? What are your members saying about, this incredible low interest rates, 0.25% base rate we've had for 7 years or something? Is that good? Is that bad? Do they want to see a normalisation? What are businesses saying? Is it propping them up because they are so indebted?
Well, we've been told for a very long time now that there are a bunch of zombie businesses around the UK propped up only by low interest rates. I'm lucky in Chambers of Commerce that I don't see very many of those. These are businesses that are paying to be part of a local membership organisation, sort of civic-minded businesses. They don't tend to have those sorts of issues. But most of them are saying that low interest rates are helpful, but they understand that a normalisation needs to come. They want it to be steady and they want it to happen over time. What they don't want to see is an overnight 200 basis point rise in interest rates, for example. They need to see it happen slowly as normalisation arrives.
When the Labour Party say they want to increase the minimum wage, ban 0 hours contracts as two of a list of points they'd like to make, would you be happy with those?
Well, I think we need to look at what's economically feasible and what's realistic. The minimum wage, for example, should rise on the basis of economic evidence and what the market should bear. We have got a panel of experts that looks at this year in and year out and may make recommendations, which the business community by and large is happy with for those increases. Increasing it arbitrarily and based on politics is not a good way to go because very likely businesses will create fewer jobs. Same goes for an outright ban on 0 hours contracts, a lot of which individual employees do like to have. So there are things that you need to look at in detail, not simply take a headline view.
If the Chancellor was listening to this, what one message do you want him to take away?
Fix business rates. It's been on the agenda for years. It hasn't actually been sorted, and you need to do more.
Adam, thank you very much. There you go. In a nutshell, we've got an answer to that, Louise. Fixed business rates. One question,
Not the first time I've heard that, to
No.
be honest. And it's been postponed because of the election.
We'll wait and see what happens with that. Dr. Adam Marshall there from the British Chambers of Commerce. A few people are telling me, Louise, that of course you don't need your voting card to actually vote.
I was going to comment that,
yeah,
but I'm
I know.
with you. I always keep it on my kitchen table.
Yeah, just as a reminder.
Yes, as a
Get
reminder.
your dates in the right order. That's what I should have said. Now, Lettucegate, a couple of months ago, wasn't it? Bad weather in Spain hit crops, drove up salad prices. Veggie fans can leave that all behind. Mild weather in the UK means crops have sprouted sooner than expected and will be rocketing into shops any time now, pushing prices lower. Paul Bishop is the director of Side Salads Wholesaler at New Covent Garden Market, where he's been based for the past 27 years. Paul, morning.
Morning,
Good
Paul.
morning, Sean.
A
Good
man
morning.
who possibly gets up earlier than us.
Yes.
We get up fairly early, yeah. Or late at night, one or the other.
27 years, Paul.
Yes.
Has this been a bit of a different start to the year for the lettuce industry?
No, we've seen them before, Sean. I mean, basically, I mean, our trade's a fascinating trade, really, because with all the modern technology and growing techniques that have evolved over the last 20 to 30 years, we're totally beholden to Mother Nature. And basically, this is why we had the crops, the decimation of crops in Spain recently due to the extreme weather conditions. And hence, this is why now that English salads and lettuce has come on slightly earlier, just because the weather and the climate since the turn of the year has been warmer than what it normally would be. So obviously, you get to an earlier crop just because of that reason.
And how does that affect what we buy in the supermarkets? How does that chain sort of work?
Well, the chain obviously goes that when we come on, everything's seasonal. So we're coming into the English season now, and like we were just saying, it's come on slightly earlier because of the warm weather. And then obviously supermarkets will go from Spanish crop to English crop now, as long as there's enough of it. And obviously we all like marketing British and UK crops because we obviously we want to support our own. So that's really the chain. So it goes from farms, and then it goes into the supermarkets and into other retail outlets all around the country, farm shops, market stalls, greengrocers, etc. And then we all market British.
And are there certain types of lettuce that we might see falling in price quite a bit more than others?
Well, unfortunately, I don't like to see it, but obviously English prices, when we get English seasons, everyone seems to think that prices should fall straight away. And, I'm a big advocate of supporting the English grower. And, I do understand that we're trying to offer the public the best prices, but we don't want it to a point where it's affecting farmers' livelihoods and obviously all the other retail section around the supermarkets, because what we all try and do is gauge what goes on by supermarkets. But there's a load of other business in the fresh produce and fruit industry other than supermarkets. So supermarkets tend, because of their power and their size, they tend to dictate what goes on with our industry with prices. And most of this normally is because they're having a battle with themselves to get market share. Obviously, so if the cheapest, saying for argument, one of the supermarkets goes for 49p with lettuce, they all tend to follow suit, other than a couple that are a little bit niche and they stand up there with a better quality and higher prices, Marks and Spencer's, etc.
Paul, thank you. We'll have to leave it there, but good luck with the rest of your day. Nearly done. Paul Bishop, Director of Side Salads at New Covent Garden Market. Judith in Lincolnshire says, shortage of hummus. What next? Salsa? Will that be a double dip recession? That's it from Wake Up to Money. Thanks for listening to the Wake Up to Money podcast. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe, as there's a new podcast every weekday. We'd also love to know what you think. You can leave us a review, email us, wakeuptomoney@bbc.co.uk. Even just a few words will do.
You're listening to a BBC 5 Live podcast.
If you like this, you might also like this.
Eye of the Storm with Emma Barnett.
Every day we're covering some sort of storm that changes people's lives forever. To find out more about our range of podcasts, click, tap or swipe bbc.co.uk/5live.